If you wanted to start watching the MCU shows after Avengers Endgame, it would take you 3,660 minutes. Okay, so what does that mean? That means you have to dedicate 61 hours of your life to watch every single minute of all the Marvel shows, starting with WandaVision. No biggie, that's just 2.5 days to watch them. You've already watched 72.5 hours, or 3 days worth, of Marvel movies to get to that point. But that's still not enough, because if you wanted to truly understand everything going on with Marvel, now that the multiverse is real and all the Netflix shows are rumored to be canon, you'd have to dedicate 7,315 minutes of your life. In other words, 122 hours, or about 1 week of your life. And that number is only going to get bigger and bigger as time goes on and more shows get made. And you don't need me to tell you all the possible productive things you could do with your life during those 7 days. I think there's a clear issue here. Let's focus on the MCU though, and not the expanded universe stuff or the comics. Looking at the current roster, you could see Marvel has way too much content, but more specifically, too many TV shows. In about 3 years, Marvel made as much content as it took them 10 years to do. If you're asking yourself how or why this is happening in the first place, I have one word for you: Disney Plus. When a major studio like Disney announces a brand new streaming platform, you better believe there's going to be a ton of demand for new content. Fans can only watch the same old movies they grew up with for so long. So if you're Bob Iger and desperately need people to stay on your platform to make money, where do you turn? I don't think it takes a genius to figure out what franchise Disney should be pumping out next. And pumping they did. If you want a sitcom show about that one side character from those Captain America movies, then there you go. What about a teenage high school coming of age story about a random girl you've never heard of and just so happens to be obsessed with Captain Marvel? Or maybe you want a show about that one random side character who was in that other show about another side character. Everything is possible with Disney Plus. So why exactly is that an issue? We're getting showered with content. We as fans should be thankful, right? Obviously, the main issue with this influx of content is time. The amount of time needed to watch all this stuff is already a huge turnoff for people, especially for the older audiences who want to spend meaningful time with their families. They don't have the time or care to spare a couple of hours to do homework for the next big Marvel movie. So when the next big movie comes out, they're left out of the loop when that random side character from that show they didn't watch appears. And the more confused they get, the less likely they stop watching Marvel altogether. But what about those, like myself, who do spare time to watch all this content? Well, those who do spend hours upon hours watching this Marvel content are met with constant mediocrity, disappointing finals, forgettable villains, and wasted potential.
You've got to do better, Senator. You've got to step up. All right. Because if you don't, the next Carlin will.
Difficult.
And you don't want to see
Might just
2.0.
literally get harder.
And this level of disappointment ultimately leads to burnout. And that's certainly happening today, with almost all online discourse about current day Marvel being negative. How can we fix this? Let's recognize the problem, because it's not what the fans, like many studio executives, are saying. Firstly, who needs this many shows? Why do we need a show about Maya Lopez? Why do we need a show about Ms. Marvel? I could see a lot of merit in making shows about side characters if done well, but realistically, 5 hours of content on a $100 million plus budget just for a single random character is absurd. I'm not the biggest fan of Werewolf by Night, but at least it's an appropriate length for a character most are unaware of. There needs to be a serious gauge here on what matters most. With that being said, I don't want to discredit the merit of these shows either, because they offer an insight to different cultures, stories, and showcase different aspects of life, which is always great. But if they're going to make shows about these characters, at the very least, write them well. Hire competent writers who care about the fundamentals of storytelling and respect the wide audience to which they're telling the story for. Don't alienate your core fan base and disrespect them for enjoying your content. Like She-Hulk's writing staff, who openly admitted and laughed at the fact that they didn't know how to write a law show at all. Ironic, given the show is called She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, which begs the question, why were these writers hired in the first place? And those who don't enjoy the brainless content are called toxic fans by the said writers. And why make shows about characters that would have been better off as a movie? Moon Knight is a great example of what could have been an amazing origin movie. While the show is decent, it's mogged with surplus filler content that could have been avoided had it been a movie. Secret Invasion, with all its potential, would have been a phenomenal movie, but instead had to be transformed, or mangled, into a television disaster. And with the surplus of content, there's no certain direction or interconnectedness like there was before, because there's way too many chefs in the kitchen. With all these different writers, directors, and minds at work, it's almost impossible to coordinate a consistent cinematic universe. When previous Marvel phases had about 5 movies, it was easy to plan out what the end goal of the phase was, how Iron Man would show up in this movie, or when Nick Fury came in for a quick cameo. Thus, this created hype for the next Marvel movie, all for the sake of a consistent and believable universe. But that's missing now. One character can be saving the world in one show, while an entirely separate, different character is saving the world in another. There's no crossover between characters anymore, and we don't even know where the MCU is going with all this now. There's no reason to care anymore, and that's what needs to change. Marvel needs to slow down a bit and heavily reconsider what they're going to do next. Marvel needs to carefully hire the right talents for the right projects. Marvel needs to make meaningful investments for not just their wallets, but for the fans who are willing to dedicate so much time to their franchise. Time is money, after all. And if there's no reason to care anymore, then audiences are going to spend their money elsewhere.